In a world shrouded in darkness and corruption, where human life held no more value than the sum of its parts, Mia found herself trapped in a nightmare beyond her wildest imagination. Her long blonde hair, once a source of pride, now hung limp and matted around her gaunt face, framing eyes that had seen too much horror in too little time. The bright smile that once graced her lips had long since faded, replaced by a permanent grimace of fear and disgust. Mia's life had been a series of traumas, each one leaving its mark on her psyche like a scar. Growing up without a father, abandoned to a mother lost in a haze of drugs and despair, she had learned early on that the world was a cruel and unforgiving place. But nothing could have prepared her for the revelation that would shatter what little remained of her world. It began with a letter, innocuous in its appearance, but devastating in its contents. Her estranged father, a man she had never known but whose absence had shaped her entire existence, had resurfaced. But this was no joyful reunion. Instead, the letter revealed a truth so horrifying that Mia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Her father, a man whose name she didn't even know, had sold her. Not metaphorically, not in some abstract sense, but literally. He had put a price on her life and sold her to the highest bidder in a secret auction of human flesh. The realization hit her like a physical blow, causing her to double over and retch, her body instinctively trying to purge itself of this poisonous knowledge. As she gasped for air, her mind raced, trying to make sense of this new reality. How could someone do this? How could her own flesh and blood see her as nothing more than a commodity to be traded? The questions swirled in her head, each one more painful than the last. But Mia had no time to process her shock and grief. The letter made it clear that her fate was sealed, and time was running out. In just 3 days, she was to be collected by her new owners. The clinical language of the letter only added to the horror, reducing her to nothing more than a package to be delivered. Panic set in, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had to run, to hide, to do something. But where could she go? Who could she trust in a world where even her own father had betrayed her so completely? With trembling hands, Mia packed a small bag, stuffing it with clothes and what little money she had saved. As she moved around her tiny apartment, her eyes kept darting to the shadows, imagining sinister figures lurking in every corner, waiting to snatch her away. She slipped out into the night, the cold air biting at her skin, a stark reminder of her vulnerability. The city streets, once familiar, now seemed alien and threatening. Every passerby was a potential captor, every car that slowed down a possible abductor. Mia's paranoia grew with each step, her mind conjuring increasingly horrific scenarios of what awaited her if she were caught. As she wandered the streets, seeking refuge but finding none, Mia's thoughts turned to the auction itself. Who were these people who would bid on human lives? What kind of monsters saw people as nothing more than a collection of organs to be harvested? Her answer came sooner than she could have imagined. As she turned a corner, seeking shelter in a dimly lit alley, a black van screeched to a halt beside her. Before she could react, strong hands grabbed her, a cloth pressed against her face. The world spun, colors blurring into a nauseating swirl before everything went black. Mia awoke to a nightmare. She found herself in an opulent room, its grandeur a mockery of the horror it contained. Crystal chandeliers cast a sickly light over plush velvet chairs arranged in a semicircle. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and barely concealed fear. As her vision cleared, Mia realized she was not alone. Other people, men and women of various ages, sat or stood around the room, their eyes wide with terror. Some whimpered softly, others remained eerily silent, as if already resigned to their fate. At the center of the room stood a man who could only be the auction master. Tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed to absorb the light around him, he exuded an aura of malevolent authority. His face, angular and severe, was a mask of cold indifference as he surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on each person like a butcher appraising cuts of meat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as silk but laced with venom. "Welcome to tonight's auction. We have a fine selection of specimens for you this evening." Mia felt bile rise in her throat as she realized the full horror of her situation. This was no ordinary auction. These people weren't here to bid on art or antiques. They were here to bid on human lives, on organs to be harvested from unwilling donors. The auction master began to describe each lot in clinical detail, listing blood types, organ conditions, and potential uses. Mia listened in mounting horror as human beings were reduced to nothing more than a catalog of parts. When it came to her turn, Mia felt the room's attention focus on her like a physical weight. The auction master's eyes raked over her body, assessing her value with cold precision. "Lot number 23, he announced. "Female, 28 years old. Excellent overall health, no history of major illnesses. Prime candidate for multiple organ harvest. Shall we start the bidding at $500,000? Mia wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but her body refused to obey. She could only watch in mute horror as wealthy men and women in expensive suits raised their hands, casually bidding on her life as if she were nothing more than a prized cow at a livestock auction. As the bidding reached a fever pitch, Mia's eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking some means of escape. It was then that she saw him, her father. He stood in a corner, his face a mask of guilt and shame, unable to meet her accusing gaze. In that moment, something snapped inside Mia. The fear and helplessness that had paralyzed her gave way to a rage so intense it threatened to consume her. With a primal scream that startled even the jaded auction-goers, she lunged forward, her hands clawing at the auction master's face. Chaos erupted in the room. Security guards rushed forward, their meaty hands reaching for Mia. But she was beyond reason now, driven by a desperate need to survive, to inflict as much damage as she could before they took her down. She grabbed a crystal champagne flute from a nearby table, smashing it and wielding the jagged stem as a weapon. Blood flowed as she slashed wildly, the crimson spray a stark contrast against the opulent surroundings. In the melee, other lots saw their chance and joined the fray. The room descended into madness, a violent orgy of desperation and revenge. The wealthy bidders, unused to such brutality, cowered and screamed, their designer clothes stained with blood and worse. Mia fought her way through the chaos, her eyes fixed on her father. He tried to run, but she was faster, fueled by a lifetime of anger and betrayal. She caught him by the throat, slamming him against the wall with strength she didn't know she possessed. "Why?" she screamed, her face inches from his, spittle and blood flying from her lips. "Why did you do this to me?" Her father, his eyes wide with terror, babbled incoherently, trying to explain, to justify his actions. But Mia was beyond listening. With a snarl of disgust, she plunged the broken champagne flute into his chest, again and again, each stab a release for years of pain and abandonment. As her father slumped to the ground, his life ebbing away, Mia felt no triumph, no satisfaction. She was empty, hollowed out by the horror of what she had done and what had been done to her. In the distance, sirens wailed. Someone had called the police. But Mia knew it was too late for justice, too late for redemption. She had become the very thing she hated, valuing her own survival above all else. As the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the halls, Mia made her choice. She would not be taken alive, would not allow herself to be cut open and parceled out to the highest bidder. With a grim determination, she turned the jagged glass on herself, plunging it deep into her own abdomen. As she fell to the floor, her life flowing out of her in a warm, sticky flood, Mia felt a perverse sense of victory. They had wanted her organs, had sought to profit from her body. But in death, she denied them even that. Her last thought, as darkness closed in around her, was that at least in this final act, she had reclaimed ownership of herself. The police burst into the room moments later, confronted by a scene of carnage beyond their worst nightmares. Bodies lay strewn about, the once pristine auction room now an abattoir of human greed and desperation. And in the center of it all lay Mia, a bitter smile frozen on her lifeless face, her body broken, but her spirit undefeated. In the days that followed, the story of the organ auction would send shockwaves through society. The wealthy and powerful who had participated found their carefully constructed lives crumbling around them as their dark secrets were exposed to the light of day. But for Mia and the other victims, justice came too late. They remained as they had lived, commodities in a world that had long since lost its humanity.